Dear friends, my topic today in the series Ideas for Life is some ideas from Menachem Mendel of Kotzk, who I mentioned is from the same group of the disciples of the Chozev Lublin, the Seer of Lublin, and particularly Menachem Mendel of Kotzk is also very close with the Yehudi Kadosh, Yaakov Yitzchak, who was called the Holy Jew, and Fshischa, Simcha Bunim, both of them who were rabbis in Fshischa. And he lived from 1787 till 1859. I'd like to read to you something about Menachem Mendel of Kotzk, and it was written by someone who comes really from the center of the Hasidic world, and that's Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was both a rabbi and a professor in New York after the war, and he really comes from a central Hasidic family in Poland and Romania. And I want to just read you what he has to say about Kotzk, because he's able to say in a very succinct way things that it's difficult for others to say. About Menachem Mendel was born in a small town called Bilgoraj near Lublin into a non-Hasidic family. He was attracted to the movement in his youth. He became a student of the Seer of Lublin, as I said before, and the Holy Jew of Fshischa, and later of Simcha Bunim of Fshischa, who we talked about last week. And his teachings, even though they're part of Hasidut, and in some way continuing the lines of thought, they're dramatically opposed to the teachings of the founders of Hasidism. Again, this is Abraham Joshua Heschel talking about, whose grandfather himself was a famous Hasidic Rav, the Apter Rav. Well, Mejibish meaning the town of the Baal Shem Tov. While Mejibish emphasized love, joy, and compassion for the world, Kotzk demanded constant tension and unmitigated militancy in combating egocentricity. The Baal Shem Tov was kind, whereas Menachem Mendel was harsh to everyone. In Mejibish there was light, in Kotzk there was fire. The furious zeal of the prophets of the old came back to life in Kotzk. Classical Hasidism tried to reach all Jews, but Kotzk was interested only in the select few. Menachem Mendel inscribed on his banner only one word, which was truth, emet. To achieve truth, he was ready to sacrifice everything. There's only one truth, stressed Menachem Mendel, and anything outside this truth is false. Worst of all, however, are the imitations of truth. The closer the imitation to the original, the worse it is. The way to the one and the only way is the way of truth in life, in the world, and in God, and it's a torturous one. You have to do away with emotional bias, with all kinds of outward appearances, even if hallowed over many generations. If a man offers prayer today because he did so yesterday, that's just a sin. Everyday prayer must be something anew. Every day a man must try to find truth as if he did not know it before. Just a few other things that Heschel says about Kotzk. Truth is the utmost freedom. Freedom means not to give in to anything outside, which an outside pressure would put upon you. Not to conform. Not to please somebody else. And I will jump. In his emphasis on study, he was closer to the Vilna Gaon. There's an interesting comparison to be drawn between the teachings of the Menachem Mendel and those also of his contemporary Soren Kierkegaard, the existentialists. Although they surely did not know each other, in both one finds the same melancholic, uncompromising search for truth. The same desire for being alone, the same conviction that there's a deep gap separating the world from God, who is not to be found either within nature only or within human reason. About 20 years before his demise, Rabbi Menachem Mendel decided to leave this world. He locked himself up in a room near the house of study where his disciples were learning. Food was passed to him through a window. And except on rare occasions, he was not seen by anybody, except for his closest friends or members of families. And there are many theories about this, why this had happened. Menachem Mendel of Kotzk, one of the most unusual stories of a Hasidic Rebbe, and the fire of Kotzk, which was all about the search of truth for the select few. Without further ado, I'd just like to mention some statements of Menachem Mendel. There are many of them, but sometimes the statements themselves include things which gives you the feeling of what Kotzk was all about. There's a famous statement of Menachem Mendel where he says, concerning the middle road, he says, only horses walk in the middle of the road. Remember, this is the 19th century, early 19th century, they didn't have cars. What does it mean, only horses walk in the middle of the road? In other words, human beings, for Menachem Mendel, because they have to strive for truth, they have to take a stance. They can't just compromise to be politically correct. Only horses walk in the middle of the road. Don't do things just because you have to. Take a stance if this is what you believe in. Something people are always afraid to do, but let me just a few others. Imaniani, if I am I, and you are you, excuse me, if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not I, and you are not you. But if I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you, then I am I, and you are you. Okay. In case you didn't get that, let me just rephrase to make it a little bit easier. Basically, he's saying that if I'm trying to create my own concept of self based on you, then it's not me. Everybody has to find out their concept of self, who they are. And everybody has to do this individually. Again, if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I'm not I and you're not you. We have to find it, everybody for themselves. Another statement of Menachem Mendel. Not everything, of course, I think these statements have been said by others too. Not everything that a person thinks do they have to say. Not everything that a person says do they have to write down. And not everything that you wrote down do you have to publish. Also, famous statement of Menachem Mendel. In general, he didn't like publishing books. Another statement of Menachem Mendel, where is God to be found? God is found in any place that human beings are willing to let him enter. Where is God to be found? In any place where human beings are willing to let him enter. Another one. When a person wants to scream, they want to scream, but they cannot scream. That is the loudest scream of all. When a person wants to scream, but they cannot, that's the loudest scream of all. Another one of Menachem Mendel. This next one sounds a little bit like George Bernard Shaw, but it is Menachem Mendel of Kotzk. When we are young, we learned how to talk. When we are old, we learn how to keep silent. And this is the irony, because it's really the opposite way. We learn unfortunately, how to speak before we learn how to keep silent, which is a big shortcoming in man. In our youth, we learn to talk. In our later days, we learn how to keep silent, which is unfortunately the wrong order of things. And as we said before, a person who prays today because they prayed yesterday, even an evil person is better than them. If you're just praying today because you prayed yesterday, what was the point? And a famous saying of Menachem Mendel ben Kotzk, which was made into a song by Naomi Shemer. There is nothing more whole than a broken heart. and there is nothing more flawed than a whole heart. There is nothing more whole than a broken heart, and nothing more flawed than a heart which is complete. And from this page of one more, I'll just say, if a person wants to bring peace into the universe, they first have to start with peace within themselves. That's actually a saying of Simcha Bunim, his teacher. If you want to bring peace in the universe, you have to learn first how to bring peace within yourself. And on this page, another famous saying of Menachem Mendel of Menachem Mendel of Kotzk. After my demise in heaven, nobody will ask me. This is actually not his statement, it's a statement of Rav Zusha of Anapola, but for some reason it's on the page, so I'll read it. After my demise in heaven, nobody will ask me why I was like Moses. The heavenly court will only ask me why I wasn't Zusha, meaning himself. And that is the scariest question. Because why I wasn't like Moses, I might have an answer. But why I wasn't myself, that's going to be a scary question. And three more short ones, and then I want to tell the story that I told last time the right way, in the right order. This is taken from a book called Amud HaEmet, in the name of the Chidushei Harim, but it's about Menachem Mendel. He says, the first time I came to Kotzk, Menachem Mendel called me over. This is by the Chidushei Harim, as the Ger Rebbe. He says, Menachem Mendel called me over the first time I came to Kotzk. And he said to me, let me explain to you what a chassid is. A chassid is somebody who asks himself, why? As you can see, this is a very different position, I would say, than the Hasidic movement had until then. The chassid is the person who asks themselves why, meaning they want to understand truth. And so this is reported by Chidushei Harim in the name, or Mayor Rottenberg, in the name of Menachem Mendel of Kotzk. And also this is taken from a book called Siach Sarfei Kodesh, 44. In the name of Menachem Mendel of Kotzk. The difference between a chassid and a mitnaged and the opponents of chassidism, the mitnagdim, is that a chassid is afraid of God, but the mitnaged is afraid of the Shulchan Aruch, of the Code of Jewish Law. Says the chassid is afraid of God, and the mitnaged is afraid of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. There's something to be said about that, but this is another book, also brought by, it's called Sefer Midor Lador. What's the difference between a chassid in Kotzk and other chassidim? Ha'achirim, the other people, the other chassidim, they keep their mitzvot publicly, and if they do a transgression, they do it privately. A chassid from Kotzk, if they do a transgression, they do it publicly. But when they do the mitzvot, when they do the good deeds, that they hide. About Kotzk. Basically, the introduction summed it up. Kotzk was about truth, to, I would say, almost to an extreme. And there's a lot to say about Menachem Mendel. There's a lot of books that are written about him, like Sneboyer Kotzk and others trying to understand this type of thinking. But basically, this whole trend, which started with the holy Jew, Yudia Kadosh of Fashischa, Simcha Bunim Fashischa, and Menachem Mendel of Kotzk, became a trend in the pursuit both of spiritual elite, religious truth, and it was, I would say, a sort of a renegade movement within the Hasidic movement, because the Hasidic movement was not as monolithic as it's very often portrayed, and it wasn't as uniform even if they seemed to wear uniforms, it was not as uniform as it was portrayed to be. And we come across trends and currents within the Hasidic movement, which really represents the trends and the currents within the spiritual life of every individual. I want to end by the same story I told last time, but I told it backwards, so I just want to say it once more. You see, I mentioned that in Kotzk, the Rebbe himself was he was more into the elite few. But out of his Talmidim, out of his students, there were those who still believed in the idea of what in Chabad they'll call ufaratz, the idea you have to go out there and find people and influence them, which was the way the Hasidic movement started under the Maggid of the Maggid of Mezrich. So, for instance, he had two renegade students. One of them was the Rebbe of Gur, who went off and started being a Rebbe and left Kotzk, which I don't think Menachem Mendel liked so much. Another one was a friend of his, Yitzchak Vorka, who started the Hasidim of Vorka, also who felt that it was important to go out and influence people, which Menachem Mendel did not see. It was sort of like, follow me if you're interested in truth, but you might say he was more into the Hasidic ethos than he was into Hasidic movement. So I'll just end with this story about Yitzchak Vorka, and I told it wrong because Menachem Mendel actually lived longer than Yitzchak Vorka. So even though it's a story from Shlomo Carlebach, and a lot of his stories come directly from the Hasidic movement, but I just switched around the name, so I'll tell it properly, and I'll end with this today. So again, Yitzchak Vorka and Menachem Mendel were very close, even though Yitzchak Vorka became a Rebbe by himself and started the movement which was called the Vorka Hasidim, which are buried, their Rebbes are buried today in the Warsaw Cemetery, if you get a chance to go there. And the story was that Yitzchak Vorka passed away. And when Yitzchak Vorka passed away, Menachem Mendel of Kotzk was sure that he would come to him in a dream and talk to him, because they were good friends for quite a long time. And the story, as told by Shlomo Carlebach, is that after the Shloshim, after the 30 days, so Menachem Mendel of Kotzk is beside himself. This doesn't make sense. I was sure he would appear to me in a dream. He would tell me what happened. This is wrong. So he does some type of technique using names of God, and he gets what we call aliyat neshama, ascent of soul, like astral ascent, where you feel your soul going up to the higher worlds, even though you're actually sitting in the same place. And he feels himself ascending to the higher worlds. I'll tell it the way Carlebach tells it. And as he's ascending through the higher worlds, he's going by the palaces of famous tzaddikim, of famous great personalities. There's the palace of the Rambam, and the palace of the Baal Shem Tov, and the palace of Rabbi Akiba and other different people within our history. And each time, as he feels himself ascending, he asks whoever he can ask. I don't know how this works, but that's the story. Have you seen my friend Yitzchak Vorka? He just came here recently. Nobody heard, nobody knew. Finally, at one point, somebody says, yes, just over a month ago, he's at the other side of the forest. I don't know what it means to have a forest up there, but that's the story. So Menachem Mendel finds this forest, and he's walking through this very dark forest. It's very scary. He feels himself walking through the forest. And finally, after a certain amount of time, he comes to the other side, and it opens up to a sea with a shore. And sure enough, he sees Yitzchak Vorka sitting on the shore, on the sand. Menachem Mendel says, Yitzchak, what are you doing here? Why didn't you appear to me in a dream? Yitzchak says, Menachem Mendel, I was busy. He says, you were busy? What were you busy doing? He says, Menachem Mendel, you don't recognize this sea, do you? He says, no, what is it? He says, Menachem Mendel, this sea is the sea of tears. Don't you know in the Slichot service, we say that every time a Jew sheds a tear down there, it's very precious, and God puts it into a flask and keeps it. These are all the tears over the generations, they're all kept here in this ocean. It's the ocean of tears. And I swore to the Holy One, blessed be He, that I will not leave this shore until He dries up all those tears. This story I see as the man of truth facing the man of compassion. And both are true, because our world is made up of truth and compassion. And we have to walk the fine line between both. Shalom, shalom.